Good morning, everyone. Welcome to St. Luke's Sunday Forum. We are so thrilled you're here in downtown Atlanta, and we are receiving all of these wonderful guests who are visiting us, and we're thrilled to welcome all of you to this. Now, let me tell you about this most unique conversation that we're having for the Sunday Forum. Part and parcel of St. Luke's Church in Atlanta is our gospel of big love, which means having a big tent and making sure that people have the safety and freedom to disagree with one another about any number of issues, theological, political, cultural, whatever, when they are at St. Luke's. So we're thrilled you're here. And I am excited that Bryan Benedict is my guest because Bryan and I had an amazing big tent conversation about 3 or 4 or 5 months ago. It was before the pandemic. And it was all at his instigation. And it was just a thrilling thing. And I've had so many questions from people. How do you have conversations with people in a very polarized culture and talk about things with which you disagree without taking it personally, without dragging one another down, without attacks and blaming and attacking? So I said, I need to ask Bryan if he and I can reprise this amazing conversation we had before the pandemic. And he agreed. He's such a generous guy. And he agreed. And here we are. We're going to go back over some material that he and I went over at lunch that day, but also elaborate on it. And it all had to do with the fact that he and I had very, very different experiences during the Vietnam War. He was an Army officer. I had been an Army officer, and he served, and I became a conscientious objector. So that's enough for right now. But now, let me simply welcome Bryan and ask you, Bryan, to introduce yourself in terms of 2 things, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
How long you have been and your family has been at St. Luke's, and then what you do in the world, you and Claire. So welcome, Bryan.
Thank you, Ed. And the second question was, what do I do in the world?
Yeah. What have you done to amass that great wealth that you have in your life?
I trick people. Like you.
Yeah, exactly. You better believe it.
Right, so I'm a lifelong member of St. Luke's. My family has been a member of St. Luke's since the late 1890s when my grandfather moved to Atlanta from New Bern, North Carolina, out of the coast of North Carolina. And after he graduated from the University of North Carolina, he was a lawyer and came here, practiced law for years, and was 99 when he died in 1971, I think it is.
Wow.
And he was the senior warden, I believe, during his term. And I think he was the founder maybe of the sinking fund. That's not the right name for it. But my aunts and my parents, my aunts and uncles and parents were all members, and my brothers and first cousins have been long members. Let me make one correction. Ed said that I was an officer. I was not. I was an enlisted man, which in the story that he tells and the story that I tell, being an officer and being an enlisted man are really opposite ends of the spectrum. So that's kind of an important of the many differences that we have in our experience. That one plays into it, I think, a lot. But after I got out of the Army in 1969, my wife Claire and I got married. And that's almost 51 years ago. I worked for 12 years for a bank in Atlanta. About 6 years I was in the property and casualty insurance business with Joe Hamilton, who in the Hamilton family is an old name in our church. And then I got involved with the construction company that a friend of mine, a lifelong friend of mine, had started. Two friends had started, and I retired from that at the end of 2012. I was president of the company when I retired. So, and since then I've been involved in other not-for-profits and I was real involved in a club on the board and as president, and so I've kept busy with that and our 2 married daughters and 4 grandchildren. So let me say this, I never get bored in a given day. I always have something to do.
I love it. I love your life, Ryan. Thank you very much for your service, who you are, what you mean to me, what you mean to St. Luke's. It's big. You are such a generous heart and spirit and soul. I'm really grateful.
Thank you very much. That's a two-way street. I love getting to know you and your being at the church and doing the positive things that you're doing for the church in this tricky time that we're in. But let's agree that nothing in this world is easy. Everything is hard. Everything takes hard work and failure and getting up and dusting yourself off and putting a smile on your face and taking the next step. Right, Ed?
Absolutely. Everything does take hard work and failure. Absolutely.
Right.
Getting back up. Absolutely.
Yeah. So
now that we've got you introduced, I mean, we could go on and on and on. I love the fact that the Benedict clan and the Alston clan and so many other families are all connected with one another at St.
The Glens, yeah.
And the Glens.
Yeah.
I mean, we could fill up an entire forum just talking about the map of your family, and it would thrill me. And let's get on to the point at hand.
Exactly.
So Bryan, nobody. Now, I've been a priest for ages. I was ordained priest when Jesus was in the youth group, and so I've been at it for a long time. Nobody has ever asked me to say, I really want to understand why your life took such a different turn than mine during Vietnam. Would you spend some time with me? And I said, wow, I'm on holy ground. So before we get into you're telling your Vietnam story, I tell my Vietnam story. Can you talk just about how you came up with that crazy idea for you and me to get together?
Yeah, well, I saw when you came to the church, when you came to St. Luke's, back to St. Luke's, a year ago. How long have you been?
Yeah, it's a little more than a year now.
A little bit more than a year.
A year and a half.
I saw some printed material that had your bio in it that said you were a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War. Well, I said to myself, I've never met a conscientious objector. I don't know what a conscientious objector looks like. I don't know how a conscientious objector decided that they were a conscientious objector, and then how they executed that to successfully become. I mean, what is that roadmap? How do you do that? And so that's what led me to pester you into having a lunch, which was hard to get on your busy calendar as always.
Thank you. I just want to, I'm making a list of really important points when you're having a conversation about differences of opinion. And I just want to point out to everybody who's viewing, and also it'd be fun to write an article about this sometime. Number one, I just want to record what a great sense of humor you have and how playful you are. And then the second thing is that you're really interested in stories and the story of somebody's life. And what's the story behind how they chose to do something? So those are just two very important parts of the whole thing.
Right. So I made the decision a long time ago that I wasn't having fun in life, or fun in what I was doing, that I was going to stop doing it.
Oh, Bryan, that'll preach. Now that just may wind up in one of my sermons in the future, my friend. So having kind of set the table, let's get to the table. And if you don't mind, tell the kind of the first level of your story of going to Vietnam and how that happened.
Okay, so that began, I was in the Army for about 2 years. And in 1967 is when I graduated from college. And in 1967, immediately before I graduated, let me back up and say this. Friends along the way, family members, friends had joined reserve units. That was the way to kind of beat the draft, not avoid, but to participate and serve in the country, but where you went for 6 months to some place and got trained and they had a 6-year obligation. I decided not to drop out of school and do that and just go ahead and graduate, and then I would figure out what I was going to do after that. Well, when I graduated, immediately before I graduated, LBJ shut down all the reserve units. When I graduated in 1967, the draft was hard at it. Had not gone through ROTC, so I was just a nobody with respect to the military. I was not married. At that time, you could get a military deferment. I was not going to business school or to law school, which could get you a deferral. I had no physical issues. I was in good physical shape. I was a prime draft candidate. So I shopped around in Atlanta in June and July of 1969, talked to the Army, the Navy, maybe the Air Force. Ended up in the Army. I joined the Army on what they call the college option program, where you go through basic training and then infantry training, advanced infantry training, AIT is what they call it. And then you spend about 6 months in OCS, you become an officer, and then you have a 2-year obligation. Went in that program. I went through basic, I went through AIT. I was in New Jersey north in cold weather, and I got some upper respiratory problems. And I went to OCS the 1st of January, 1968. I got sick again in that program, and I was told, I ended up in the hospital for 4 or 5 or 6 days, and I was told that I had to start the whole program all over again. Well, it was at a point there where I said, heck with this, because the college option program, if you dropped out anywhere along the way, all you had was a 2-year obligation from when you went in. And I decided to just drop out and take my chances. So in dropping out, I was a PFC, which is at the, kind of the lower level of all people in the military. I was an E3, which is your rank, and I was an 11B10. An 11B10 is an infantryman. So I hung around the replacement detachment for about a month or so, and I ended up on orders for Vietnam. In the meantime, as I had gone to summer school between the 9th and 10th grade, I learned how to type, and I got a secondary MOS. MOS is a military occupational skill. So my personnel file said, this guy's an infantryman, and but he's also got a secondary skill of being a clerk typist. Ended up on about 51 years ago from today is when I really got to Vietnam, 2nd or 3rd of July, through San Francisco, Travis Air Force Base, ended up at Ben Hoa, just outside of Saigon, and the replacement detachment. And I was assigned to the 25th Infantry Division, which takes care of the area to the northwest of Saigon, between Saigon and the Cambodian border, and through which the Ho Chi Minh Trail travels, if you will. When the VC and the NVA used to come bomb Saigon and blow it up all the time, they would kind of come back, Cu Chi Base Camp, where I was. At the very last minute in my replacement, I went to the replacement detachment, the 25th Administration Battalion, where they process do all the personnel stuff. And fortunately, they had picked my records out, and I was having an interview with the captain that was in charge of personnel, and he offered me a job of working in the office there, which I immediately took, because if the next day I would have come down on orders, and I would have gone to the field and been a straight leg infantryman at 6 feet 1 inches, which I didn't like that. Because the VC were all over where I was, and they were all over where I was for a year. So I ended up being the person, in the year that I spent there, I ended up being the person that assigned E1s through E6s, which is staff sergeant down, that came in every day to the 25th Infantry Division, to the 9 infantry units that we had. 6 of them were straight legs out humping in the boonies and encountering the VC, and the other 3 were on those mechanized tracks. There were 15,000 enlisted men in the 25th Infantry Division. And so my job that I did for about 9 months that I was there was to take the 10, 20, 50, 100 replacements we got in every day to replace the people that either completed their 1 year of service and went home, got wounded and were medevac, or got killed. So every day we were in touch with all these units and seeing who was having major issues, and then we would send the people out there, assign the troops, and there were mostly 11B-10s or mortar men, but we had medics and supply and transport kind of people, aviation mechanics. We had helicopters all over the place. So that's what I did. So I had a great job. It was fascinating and interesting and challenging and rewarding. And I did that in a bad place. I had guard duty every sixth night, approximately. And that scared the hell out of me in the dark, just out there, all kind of bombs and rockets and mortars. And our base camp kind of routinely got rocket and mortar attacked. And I saw incredible stuff.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the big picture. That's my short version. My long version would take the rest of the day. And I love telling my long version too.
Of course. We love our stories. I do.
Yeah. Well, if you don't tell your stories, then people don't know what happened, what you did, and the 3 million people that went over there, everybody's got their own different story, and it's special. I got a book on that, and I'll share that with you later on. Okay.
Good. Well, I mean, you've just underscored the kind of the core of having a conversation like this. If it's not story based, it's not going to go anywhere, and there's not going to be any understanding, and there's not going to be an appreciation of somebody else. I mean, I just really do appreciate how you came out and said this was a rewarding experience.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, you had some close calls. You're in the middle of bombing. Nevertheless. Well, my story, and this was what you helped me understand, is that I'm only, a couple of years younger than you are. And what happened at the national level really had an impact on me personally, because you had a situation where LBJ had done away with the reserve stuff. And here you were draftable immediately. Here you were going to go.
Right.
And what happened to me that was comparable is, you'll remember that we bombed Cambodia during the Vietnam War. And when that was announced and when that was revealed, then there were some protests going on at college campuses. And the really tough one was at when reserve officers came onto a campus and killed at Kent State.
At Kent State, yeah. That was awful.
Students. It was just absolutely horrible. And there were kind of two issues: using the military against our own citizens, which has come up recently. And then the other thing was about the illegality in certain areas of certain things that happened in the war. Nevertheless, the direct impact on me is that as soon as those Kent State kids were killed in 1970, it was May 4, I think, in 1970,
right.
Then all of the campuses erupted. I was in law school at Vanderbilt. I had gone through ROTC. I had a second lieutenant status, all on and on and on. And so I went to my first ever peace rally and never heard of such a thing.
But you got a law school deferment, right?
I did. I was deferred.
Yeah.
Precisely. And that's a huge part of this story. I love your interrupting me and clarifying that. That's really, really important. And so I went, and there was this campus minister, a Methodist minister, a chaplain for Vanderbilt. And he said, everybody here has a deferment. Everybody here is to some degree privileged and protected. And he said, if it weren't for your being here, then likely you would be fighting in Vietnam, or you would have to declare yourself about Vietnam. You may be here, you haven't thought it through. Well, that was the case for me. I hadn't thought it through. And in my back pocket, I had a draft card, and the draft number was number 4. And I knew that I would be going to Vietnam and that I needed to figure out where I stood on this thing. And it was the first time I had heard of the word solidarity. that you have to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and figure out what you would do if you were walking in their shoes. And particularly being identified with people who don't have the deferments that you have and don't
Right.
have the privilege that you have. Well, I went to his office after this rally and I said, man, you got me. I need to figure this thing out. Do you have some books? And he threw a mimeographed bibliography at me. And I picked it up, and there was one book that really leapt out. And it was the book called Faith and Violence by Thomas Merton. Never heard of Thomas Merton. This was 3 years after he had died. And I read him cover to cover. And by the next January, I was ready to say, I don't believe in war in any form. And I am going to see if I can get named a conscious objector. So I had to fill out all this tome of a form. And it was a little book about me and all that. And then I had to go to Fort Bragg, be interviewed by an Army psychiatrist, an Army chaplain, and then an Army officer who had fought in Vietnam. And all three had to agree that I really did believe what I said I believed. And then I had to go back to my home selective service board in Jessup, Georgia, where they had never had anybody apply for a conscious objector status ever. And they tried to talk me out of it. And they knew my mom and daddy because everybody in Jessup knows everybody else. And they said, son, don't you know your mom and daddy going to be embarrassed? And don't you want to be a mech, a medevac, or a medical assistant? So I said, no, I thought this through. So anyway, they gave it to me. So I had all sorts of really great benefits that came out of that, just like you had great benefits that came out of your service. And I had to serve an alternative service. I taught children in a learning disabled school, a school for learning disabilities, disabled children. And so it was just really, really good. So that I really appreciated when we had our conversation first. You're giving me the space to reflect and think about kind of what things had impacted me that influenced me. And then you had done the same thing. And I really, really appreciated that about our conversation.
It was a great lunch. It lasted about 2.5 hours. We were both late for the next thing.
That's exactly true. And then I want to talk about what we talked about all the way home, because that was a part of it too as well. But let's just stay with it now.
Okay.
So how, as somebody, Bryan, who's 150 years old by now. No, you're not that old, are you?
I'm getting close. I'm halfway there.
Halfway there. But as a mature person who's reflected back on your life, can you just talk about, I mean, Vietnam has been just a huge historic marker for every American who lived through it and since, because a lot of our culture wars are still about fighting that war. But can you just kind of reflect on what it's been for you to be a Vietnam veteran?
Well, that's a good question, and I would say it makes you value every day more than perhaps you wouldn't. That's everybody should value every day they have in life,
right?
And one thing about being a Vietnam vet, everybody I've ever talked to, it's the kind of thing that it stays with you all the time. You know, you can't. It's with you. People that had a military experience like that, and it's not exclusive to Vietnam. I'm sure the people that were in Afghanistan and Korea and you name it, you think about it every day. So it's a part of you that it's just kind of always hanging back there. I think there's a lot of people that had a far more difficult experience than I had there, that have have demons and can't talk about it or don't want to talk about it. And I appreciate that. And I think that's that's their privilege, and I understand that. So if I answered your question.
You did. In fact, you answered it in such a way that I really was deeply moved when you said, "I think about it every day." That moved me deeply, Bryan, because wow, I think that a lot of people who served in Vietnam or who came back with PTSD,
Yeah,
or who were POWs. I had an uncle who was a POW during World War II,
yeah,
and he lived with that every day. And on and on and on. Um, we need, as Americans, as members of the human family, we need to keep in mind that everybody is carrying with them something they think about every day.
yeah.
And sometimes it haunts them every day. And sometimes it's a struggle every day. I really appreciate your saying that. Yeah, you did answer my question.
Yeah. Well, it was just such an incredible year that it's just there. So
Indeed.
yeah, but
So my counterpart would be to say that, yeah, in one way, and not I think as maybe painfully, but nevertheless, in one way or another, I think about that 6 month moment in my life when I went from, or a year moment, from being an Army officer through ROTC, through walking out of law school and going to the ROTC office on the campus of Vanderbilt and asking for, I think one of the scariest things I ever did was to go up to this tough looking staff sergeant who was staffing the ROTC office at the Vanderbilt campus and saying, sir, would you hand me
yeah,
a conscientious objector application? And I thought, oh my Lord, am I going to fall through the middle of the earth? And he was not happy about handing it to me.
right.
But then that whole process of doing it. And then I think I told you that. So everybody who's listening, who might not know about the history of St. Luke's, so I was on staff when I was a kid and got ordained. I was trained and ordained at St. Luke's. And the rector under whom I served was named Dan Matthews Sr. And so the bishop had sent me to Dan to say, okay, you're going to get trained there. And so you've got to interview Dan. Dan's got to interview you. And then Dan said, and you're going to have to be interviewed by the vestry. And oh my God. And then I thought, am I going to tell this vestry that I am a conscientious objector? And I said to Dan, and he wouldn't let me off. He didn't solve any of my problems. He says, Ed, that's really up to you whether you're going to tell the vestry that or not. So I gulped that night and I told them. And Brad Curry was the senior warden. And he said, I think it's wonderful for us to have a young man of such integrity and thought.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh, what was that about? That was grace, So what else should I ask you? What else did we talk about at lunch that day? Because it was a fast 2.5 hours.
Right.
But what else should we unpack, either from your story or mine?
I'll say this from my story. I'll say that over the years, I've had lots of people that didn't serve at all,
yep,
or that ended up going to Germany or something, express regret to me, almost apology to me. I'm not saying this happens all the time, at the fact that they didn't go have that experience. And I've always said to people, wait a minute, everybody, you play the hand you're dealt. And in this situation, everybody was looking for some way to a lot of people look for a way to get into it. A lot of people try to find a way to go sideways or get out of it. And that's, that's just the way it was. And that's the way people are. So I don't hold anybody in any way about what they did or didn't do.
Yeah.
And I loved your story because it made complete sense.
Yeah.
And your story is tied to the grim things that were going on over there and in the country.
Right.
It made you flipped the switch and said, wait a minute, this is not right. And I've read a lot of books in the last, let's say, 15 years on just the history of the war and how we got there. And it was kind of, it was a mistake. And it got out of control, and we just kind of ended up where it was. But you can't change that. So
right. That's right.
Happened. And so let's all go on to the next thing. Right.
Indeed. And we must go on to the next thing. The question I have, and we didn't talk about this at lunch that day, but I really want to tap your wisdom here, is, our country right now seems so divided and so polarized. And some of it is about war, some of it's about Vietnam, some of it's about other things.
Yeah.
I know you are a thoughtful, reflective person. What's your thinking about our moving ahead and trying to find a way to move ahead together rather than move ahead divided?
I don't know what the specific answer is. I keep kind of looking for, okay, now that all this has happened, then what do we do next? And nobody seems to have, well, here's what we ought to do. I can say that in your lifetime, in our lifetimes, we've seen change in the arena of race of huge proportion.
Yes.
And there's obviously still work to do.
Right.
I'm getting my pointer now.
But the whole thing about moving forward,
yeah,
and moving forward together if we can. Yeah. How do we heal our divisions? How do we do that? Do you have some wisdom to share?
Time heals. Time going by, and everybody
right.
kind of resetting the clock and saying, okay, here's what happened. So why did it happen? And trying to figure out what we need to do. Well, obviously, the first thing everybody needs to tighten down on the police.
Yes.
Throughout the country. So that's an easy thing. But how do we solve inadequate healthcare? How do we solve inadequate education opportunities? On and on and on. I'll say that, and that list is longer than just those couple of things. How do we get better housing? How do we make things better for people that have more of a challenge and just getting through every day?
Right.
But just to the question to the point of the divisions in the country, the political divisions, if you include that, I don't think it's ever been a time in history that you haven't had huge political conflict and divisions. And I'm reading a book in my book club on Harry Truman and Douglas MacArthur. And I've just gotten in. Truman's dissing the media because they don't tell the truth about what he says, and I've read a book. You could read all kind of history. I read this book on it was about England getting into World War I and building ships in the late 1890s, early 1900s. It was called Dreadnought, and they had a large part of the book was how the one political party just eviscerated the other party, and all the that's just kind of like, man, we have these national elections and people win them by small margins. That means half the people don't like the bums that are in, and half the people do like the bums that are in.
Yeah.
So,
well, you're also bringing up for me the issue of having some humility. We are having a tough time, and I think it's a turning point. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And you and I have lived through several turning points, and this pandemic may be the biggest turning point we've ever lived through. Last night I was listening to some person who said, the entire planet is caught up in this thing, and it's going to wind up changing absolutely everybody on the planet in some way. And it's the first time in maybe more than 100 years that something has changed the whole planet that was not a war. It's
right.
caring about one another and the health of one another. And I wear a mask so you won't get sick, and you wear a mask so I won't get sick. And somebody just told me in a meeting that she wanted to, yeah, there you go. You got your mask ready.
Which is better, with it or without it? Don't answer that question.
There's your great sense of humor. But there was this woman who was saying, I want a mask that says, when I put it on, it says, I'm wearing this for you, and the whole notion of our staying healthy for one another. We're staying healthy for ourselves, yes, because we don't want to die. And we're also doing this so we don't spread it. And there's this vision of our being interwoven and interconnected, and how we can't separate ourselves. It's crazy to claim that we're separate beings.
Interconnected and somewhat dependent upon the other person.
Indeed.
Right?
We are so interdependent. And so, But before I go to this next set of questions, and I do know I've got to wrap this up pretty soon. So are you getting involved in conversations with people who disagree with you culturally or politically or theologically? Or is that coming into your life these days at all?
You're talking about other than my wife? I take that back.
There is that.
I didn't, whoever's watching this, don't repeat that, okay?
No. We're not repeating it. This won't be seen by anybody.
I don't think so. I take it back. Yeah, yes, people that have a different viewpoint or see things differently. Yeah, of course. I've got children in their 40s. They don't have the same lens that I have. They see things differently, and they have kids. So everybody that I encounter is not walking down the same path.
Right. Yeah. So I want to make an observation about what happened on our day.
Yeah.
So we got in the car. I mean, I really felt that something had deepened in our relationship, that it really had become a friendship, that, you were sitting in the pew listening to or putting up with my sermons for a year.
Listening to, not putting up. A, not B.
And however, we went from priest parishioner, I think, to friendship. And I would call you and, say anything. And it was so wonderful. On the way home, we were in your car, you were taking me back to church, and we started talking about preaching. And you started telling me about what made for good sermons and what made for not so interesting sermons. What I remember, I want you to say what you remember, but what I remember was, Ed, I really perk up when you start in a sermon telling a story about yourself.
Right.
That's right.
I remember that conversation crystal clearly.
Yeah.
So, because I think we had reached a level of honesty with each other.
Right.
I say that to you because I said that to you in confidence, but I said that to you because I believe that whenever a preacher begins a sermon by telling a story of something that happened to them or something that happened in the world or in the neighborhood, that then leads to a lesson, an observation on life, a better understanding. Wherever it leads, it's impactful and meaningful, and it gets my attention. I pay more attention. I said to you something like that, right?
That's exactly what you said.
Yeah.
And then we won't repeat the following, but then we got into talking about people behind their backs, and I just thought that was fun. That was wonderful.
Yeah, that was. Why don't we change the subject right now?
I know exactly right.
No, you go. Yeah, we did do that. We were. I was frank, and you were frank, and we were
absolutely.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, you agreed with me.
You're absolutely right. I do.
Yeah.
I really do agree with you about that, and I think that what we can do is we can market this video, and we could make a whole bunch of boring priests into scintillating preachers just by listening to our advice that we've well, Bryan, I'm so grateful to you for this. I'm grateful to you for you and for Claire. Thank God she keeps you in line. And for your membership over all of these more than 100 years, it seems like. You're right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, not you personally. And
exactly.
but you're just a gift to me and to St. Luke's and to the world, and I'm grateful to you.
Well, you're a gift to St. Luke's. Let me say that. I said that earlier in this conversation, and you're a gift to your trade.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
You like that? You are. You're still full life and still full of vigor and at your advanced age. Like somebody said, you've got some more gas in your tank.
I do. Yeah, I love that. I've never got some more gas in my tank. So, any final words you want to share?
No, I've enjoyed this. I'm happy to participate. And I think it's important that people know stories about what happened happened to people at that point in time, and how it influenced their lives and or led them in direction. So,
yeah, I think my only closing thought is, in every relationship, in every encounter, let's just all remember there's a story inside that other person. And sometimes it's a story about which they think every day. And it behooves us, if we really want to walk the talk of becoming one and unified and not polarized and divided, take time to listen.
Exactly.
To the stories.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, thank you, my brother. I hope you have
all right. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Be back with us next Sunday. Really glad you were here.